I'm Beth Weinstein, spiritual business coach, helping you align with your purpose and grow your business so you can help more people, share your unique medicine, and make a difference in the world doing work that you love. And I have the honor of presenting Dr. James Fadiman with us here today. Thank you for being here, James.
My pleasure.
So good. And if you don't know who James Fadiman is, you might have been hiding under a rock all these years, but James Fadiman is famous for the Fadiman Protocol. He is part of the documentary, the Netflix documentary, How to Change Your Mind in the Michael Pollan book. And I'll tell you a little bit more about his bio, and then we'll go right into it. So James Fadiman has a bachelor's of arts from Harvard and a master's and PhD from Stanford, and did his dissertation on the effectiveness of LSD-assisted therapy. He has held a variety of positions, teaching at San Francisco State, Brandeis, and Stanford, consulting, training, counseling, and research. He has taught in psychology departments, design engineering, and for 3 decades at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, which is now Sophia University, that he co-founded. He has had published textbooks, professional books, a self-help book, a novel, and a series of videos, Drugs the Children Are Choosing, for national public television. His books have been published in 8 languages. He was also featured in a National Geographic documentary and has had 3 solo shows of his nature photography. He has had his own consulting firm and has been the president of a natural resource company. He has also been involved in researching psychedelics for spiritual, therapeutic, and creative uses, and is best known for his work on microdosing. James has published The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, Safe, Therapeutic, and Sacred Journeys, and is working on a book about microdosing. You can check out his website right here below this interview. And James, it's such an honor to have you here. You are a true psychedelic pioneer, and I want to thank you for the work you've done to really change the consciousness of humanity, hopefully for the better. But let's get into it. How did you even start your career, researching LSD, especially back when it was probably considered quite taboo, way more than it is today?
No, actually, I'm even older than that. The Civil War and the other things I was involved in. And when I got interested in psychedelics, they were legal. And people would write to Sandoz and they'd say, "Can I have some LSD to do some research?" And literally, I've seen what Sandoz writes back. It's a little paper, and it says, "Enclosed you will find a whole bunch of LSD in little ampules. Tell us what you're doing with it." And I looked at that and I thought, whoa, things have changed. And the reason was because Sandoz is a pharmaceutical company. They said, "This drug is so strong and so amazing. How can we make money from it?" And someone said, "Well, someone has to use it for something." So that's where the research was going when I got in. And it had moved from early idea, which is, gee, you could go psychotic with this for a few hours, and wouldn't that be a wonderful learning experience for psychiatrists? And then somebody actually said, if you don't make it a horrible setting, people don't go psychotic. They discover the vast inner world of beauty and truth and all the things that we think are essential. And so I came in that lovely period when there was a group near Stanford, where I was a graduate student, with total government support, running a little clinic, which meant every couple of days, a couple of people would come in and get what was then quite extraordinary, a beautiful living room, art, music, flowers, 2 guides, a man and a woman, a couch. This was not a clinic. And in that setting, people would be able to let go fully. And so very, very high doses, transcendental. And that's all. I thought that was all that was important. And at some point, the universe said, "How about way down here in the corner? And you're interested in 400 micrograms. How about 10 micrograms?" And my feeling was, that's ridiculous. Who cares about that? And so the last 10, 11 years, that's all I worked on, is microdosing. And it's different. It's not a little teeny, people get a little confused. It's not a little teeny trip. It's a different experience, and it has different uses, and it is infinitely safer, infinitely easier, and of course, less expensive, and so forth and so on. So that's it.
Love it. It's funny, my dad was at Stanford for graduate school at that time as well. It's too bad that he wasn't involved in that.
Well, maybe.
Unless he never told me. But I always love to know, when was your first psychedelic journey, and did it have an influence on you going into this field? Like, which came first, the chicken or the egg?
So I was after college, I was living in Paris. I was writing a novel which many critics have said wasn't very good. Having a wonderful time, fascinating. And my favorite undergraduate professor, Richard Alpert, who became Ramdas, shows up in Paris because we'd become friends. And he said, the greatest thing in the world has happened to me. And I thought, well, that's nice. He's my friend, good. And I sat back waiting for the story. And out of his breast pocket comes a little bottle. And I'm so straight, I don't drink coffee. Okay. And he says, this is what, and I thought, he's healthier than I've ever seen him. How bad can it be? And so I take what would then be a medium dose of psilocybin. And I'm sitting, this is now Paris, and I'm sitting in a cafe, and there's a boulevard in front of me, and there are people walking in back, and the colors get a little brighter, and it's a little much, and I'm hanging in there, and I'm hearing these conversations as people walk by, and then I realize, wait a moment, I've been in Paris 8 months, my French isn't very good, I've never been able to hear those conversations. So I said to Dick, this is too much for me. He said, it's too much for me too. I said, what? You haven't taken anything. It's my first night in Paris. So we went to my hotel room and changed my life. Now, we changed it at the level of kind of personal awareness and personal ideas and kind of therapeutic issues. And did I really need all those books in order to have an identity? A few months later, my draft board said, hey, we've got choices for you. You can go to Vietnam and crawl in the mud on your elbows carrying and shoot people you don't even know, or you can go to graduate school. And I thought, graduate school? That sounds fantastic. So I ended up at Stanford, really not wanting to be in graduate school at all, but way better choice. And a local group was working with psychedelics. I introduced myself, we got together, and I had the life-changing event, which was realizing, with the help of a lot of LSD, that Jim Fadiman was a subset of a kind of larger being, and that larger being was connected all the way out. And as Michael Pollan says in a wonderful metaphor, he said, I looked out and my identity was spread all over the landscape like a coat of paint. So that was the shift. And then I was a first-year graduate student in a department that at best would think I was crazy if I said what I was thinking. And so I kind of tiptoed through and managed to get out and have not been arrested, really not even once.
That's amazing. This is definitely pioneering. I mean, I'm curious, how did then the study of microdosing come about? And, it's just so interesting to see how much it's present in our collective, at least here in the Western world. It's almost to the point where it's I say it's almost legal, even though it's not, and it's just so accepting. We now have moms microdosing. We now have, like I mentioned, like my house cleaners coming to me asking for microdosing. But how did you stumble upon that, and then think that maybe you were onto something for?
Well, stumble's the right word. It's a good word. I was having lunch with Robert Forte, Forte, and Robert is one of the people who first got people interested in MDMA, and also collected a book of essays about Tim Leary. He's a very important kind of covert figure. And he was telling me about Hoffman, who took microdoses. And I said to myself, after hearing about microdoses, like, who cares? Because the only important thing is transcendence and being God and all those things. But it worked out that I somehow had some LSD available, which had just happened. And I was in Santa Cruz, California. And in Santa Cruz, California, if you say to people, a lot of people, would you be interested in trying psychedelics in a new way? Sure, what is it? So people said, microdosing is kind of nice. I'm going to do it again. And so I began to simply explore it. And then a lot of interesting things happened, and people kept exploring it and kept sharing it and kept letting me know what was going on. And gradually I began to understand why it has become so popular. And the answer is very simple. People not only feel better, but they are better. And that means if people are, healthy and effective and interesting, they find that they are simply doing more and better at that. If they have sleep issues, they're sleeping better. And what's lovely when you're doing research, there's a whole thing about, is it a placebo? Meaning, are people getting what you tell them they're going to get or what they think they're going to get? And so what you look for is stuff off to the side. And so suddenly I was getting these reports, and people said, oh yeah, I'm getting better grades in school, that's why I microdose. But I noticed I'm drinking less coffee, I'm smoking less dope, I'm drinking less, and I'm sleeping better. And I noticed my diet is, in spite of me, tending towards healthy. Now that was revelation. Now, if you think about it, why are people having less of all those things? Well, we all take those things to shift either our energy or our mood or both. But if my energy and my mood are fine, no interest. So we began to look at what was being rebalanced. And it got out of hand. And we finally, Sophia Korb, a colleague of mine, and I did a little website which said, if you're reading this, here's what you want to know about microdosing. In return for our giving you this information, please take it in the way we're suggesting, take some notes about what you're doing, and in a month, let us know. And so we ended up, you're saying Western world, that was like 6 years ago, and we had input from 51 countries. A new group, microdose.me, Paul Stamets and a lot of other really wonderful people, like 20,000 people, they had from 80 countries. So this is a world phenomena. And since if people are microdosing, they look just like they normally look, only they're nicer. It hasn't made, there's not been either a front lash or a backlash.
It's incredible. That's why I said it's almost like it's legal. There's now stories of the moms in Prospect Park at the farmers market. Someone's selling mushroom tea just out in the open, even though it's New York City and it's technically still illegal. But it's kind of at that point where it's becoming so accepted. Now, the one thing I would like to hear about, because I asked Paul Stamets this a few years ago. Let's talk about what is known as the Fadiman Protocol for those that haven't heard about it. And how did this came through research, I'm assuming. There's all these different theories of how to best microdose and what works best. And now there's microdosing coaches, and there's microdose websites, and there's courses you can buy on microdosing. And then there's people like me that just go by intuition only, which maybe isn't the best way.
No, that's actually a protocol. That's called the intuitive protocol.
Intuitive protocol. It's like, I just go by, do I need it today? Yes or no? But it, kind of works for me.
Let me go back a step, because the whole idea of a protocol is one of the things that makes it not like a pharmaceutical, which is very early on, those people in Santa Cruz were not only saying that they liked it and had a good day, they were saying they had a good 2 days. Now, when you take a high dose, and many of the people listening know exactly what I'm talking about, there's an afterglow of about 4 to 6 weeks where you can make changes in your life more easily, you're learning more easily. It's a very big deal. And it turns out, it looks like, for microdosing, there's a little afterglow. And a number of people started saying to me, second day is really better. Partly because they know there's no psychedelic in their system. And partly that's just what it was. So I thought, well, that's cool. But if I'm trying to learn about what it's like, I don't want people to be taking it every 2 days and basically have a steady state experience, because then I only get like one report. So I thought, well, what if you took the third day off you should go back down to base. And then the fourth day, when you take a microdose, I get new information. So it was researchy and selfish and so forth. But it turned out after about 30 days, people were saying, the third day looks a lot like the second day, that looks a lot like the first day. And it's the safest, obvious protocol because it's the least amount of material. And that's why it happened. Now, the only hard part for people is that it's every fourth day, and the week is 7 days, not 8. So people actually have to pay attention. And that turned out to be beyond, that was a tough one. So the other common sense day is every other day. And that's the people in the Microdosing Institute in Holland really developed that, and they're like 10,000 people have worked with them. And that works just fine because they're not doing the same kind of questioning I was. And then there is Paul Stamets suggests you take it 5 days on and 2 days off, which sounds a lot like week and weekend, or 4 days on and 3 days off. And I said to Paul at one point, which is it? And he smiled. He said, you can't be too rigid. And I thought, no, I guess you can't. So, and the other protocol is the one you use. And now people call that the intuitive protocol, which is you get up in the morning and you say, what does my body need? What does my mind need? What does my spirit need? And would it like a microdose? And have I not been microdosing just in the days prior? So it makes sense. Mm. And so that's what we're doing. Now, there are some specialized protocols for specialized conditions that we're learning about. But that's the basics. And that's the other question that comes up is, what are the substances? And it's 95% of everything I hear and read and research is either psilocybin in the natural mushroom or LSD. And pretty much there are some subtle differences, but for most people, they work about the same for what people want to take microdosing for.
It's just amazing how microdosing is just become so part of this international conversation. It's all over the mainstream media, it's in the entertainment. I'm curious, how do you feel like microdosing might have large scale effects on where we go as a humanity? Do you ever think about how this might play out in 30, 40, or 100 years?
Well, 100 years, the few people that will be microdosing, but that's the grim side. No, what I gave a talk at Santa Cruz some years ago, students mainly, but someone came up afterwards and said, Dr. Fadiman, I want to give you a new vocabulary word. I said, okay, psychedelic. I said, what's a psychedelic? And she said, well, a group of us get together every quarter or so, and we take a certain amount of psychedelics and we hike. We go out into nature. One of the things that we know is that people who microdose are more likely to be more aware of the natural world and more inclined to understand that they're part of it, and that saving any part of it saves them as well. So you're getting a larger and larger group of people who are simply more aware that we have to save the natural world if we want to save ourselves. So that's its kind of world intention. And that's very important. So what I've seen is when I begin to talk with an ecological organization, I'm now becoming aware that a larger percentage of them will have microdosed than the general population. So that's where we see it going.
It's incredible to think about how this might have large scale implications. Maybe it will actually change our habits and the way we do things and the way we make big decisions as a species. I'm curious, as a microdosing pioneer, where do you feel that the macrodose, or let's say the norm, I don't know what the official term for normal journey is, but like a 2-gram dose, where do you think this plays a part? Do you feel like the microdosing is going to then lead a lot of people to explore the larger doses? Do you feel like...
Two things. One is a number of people, usually for a long time, the people attracted to microdosing already had psychedelic experience. So they were adding it to, and obviously you can microdose and go about your work. And if you take a high dose, you need to lie down and put on eye shades and, and listen to Janis Joplin or something, whatever turns you on. This is, so I like to think of it as there are different bands on the radio. When you go from FM to AM, it's still noise, it's still music, it's still commercials, but it's a very different world. And so the microdosing world is not the high dose world. It's really a different country. And mainly because it improves this being at this level, at this activity. And one of the best known books about microdosing is called A Really Good Day, which is a good definition of what effective microdosing is. At the end of the day, you say, well, I got a lot more done than I usually do, and I answered a couple of phone calls that I've been avoiding for weeks, and I was nice to Charlie, even though he's still a jerk, but I was nicer to him and it felt fine, and he was nice. And when I went to the gym, I did maybe an extra set of reps, and I ate salad more than I usually do. Oh yeah, and I also microdosed, I forgot. So that's what we're looking for. And that's very different. And that's, of course, super safe. I mean, one of the, psychedelics, high dose, they're super safe in a physical sense, but the chances of your knowing something important that may lead to actual changes in your life is also very high. And so you're taking, you're putting your attitudes and beliefs on the line with a high dose. And microdosing is your system works better. So if you have neuropathic pain, you hurt less. If you're depressed, you realize that only part of you is depressed and actually part of you is feeling pretty good. This is a very different, so it's a different situation. And it's more popular probably now than high dosing worldwide because of that. One, it's super safe. It's helpful pretty much no matter what level you're coming in at. It's not about illness to health, it's about wherever you are to a more attuned self. So you're always, whatever you are, you're getting healthier. And if you happen to already be healthy, you then get to do things even better. That's pretty, and the other thing is the shift from LSD, synthetic, and you have to know, and it's not easy to make. It's not an easy synthesis. To mushrooms. And one of the things about psychedelic mushrooms is there's 200 different species that are active. They grow on every continent but Antarctica, and they don't know they're illegal. So we're dealing with a natural substance into a natural species, and one then wonders how long have mushrooms had psychedelics in them, and you realize way before there were human beings. And there's this kind of fun thing that people in the biology world do is, what could be the real use? Why does the mushroom have it? And the answer is that's probably not for us to know. But one of its uses seems to be to make us a little saner and a little less likely to harm the environment.
Yeah, that's big. I mean, that feels like a common thread between any of these, entheogenic plants and, substances that come from the animal kingdom, that they have this same thing in common, right? Like this connection to the earth, this awareness of how we are interconnected and on all one with nature and really the whole universe. And that's one thing, some people I've interviewed over the years say, like these plants or these fungi have their own, consciousness trying to teach us and try to tell us. And I'm wondering, do you believe that there's a reason why these have become exponentially popular over the last, 30, 40 years during this time we're in? Do you believe there's a connection, or you just believe that's a coincidence?
No, actually, I'm not sure about mushrooms because they've been growing everywhere. But why did ayahuasca, which is two substances boiled for 5 hours, so they're not kind of, I just found it on the tree. Why does that become very, very popular worldwide? When it was there, it's been there and it's been the same tribes using it and so forth. And my theory is that ayahuasca, looking around, is called a teacher plant. And as it looks around, it says human beings, they kill each other, they hate each other, they make love with each other. It has nothing to do with us. Let them do what they want. And if they come to us, we'll heal them. Now, ayahuasca is looking around and said, whoa, you guys are harming the rainforest. You guys are harming plants. You guys are cutting down old growth trees to make toilet paper. You've lost it. You're now a danger. And what happens when one species is a danger? Well, when you're human beings, you kill it. And that destroys the ecology and the habitat. We know that's wrong. Plants say, well, what can we do to help human beings not harm us? So and they find that if you that's why we talk about mama ayahuasca. See, nobody ever says mama LSD. So nobody says, that mama, ibogaine has a spirit. And so what these plant spirits, which inhabit plants, are doing is they are trying to help us while there's still a chance, because we're all, the plants have gotten that we're in this together. So that's as far as my metaphysics go.
The plants have gotten it. The humans, we're still learning that. Hopefully these medicines will help us get that eventually, someday. Well,
we're doing in a sense, the maybe microdosing is spreading so fast because the plants have figured out it's easier. We can get more people on board, and once they become aware of nature, then they're working with us, not against us, and that will help a lot. It may be too late for the human species, but it's not too late for the planet.
Good point there. Now, I want to ask you, you've been a pioneer in this field since before they were actually illegal, and then they became illegal, and now we're seeing movements to decriminalize and legalize in some places. And now there's this whole industry around this. I'm curious, do you have any concerns, or do you find that there's anything that you see that might be challenging out there? There's a lot of differences of opinions and venture capital coming into this space, or patenting psilocybin strains. I'm curious your opinion. Do you feel like this is going in the right direction, or it just is what it is? I'm curious what you think of that.
Well, I confess, when it was first coming in, I called the people who were funding it vultures. So probably I had a negative point of view. But what I'm watching is that the nice thing about entrepreneurs is they're first, and what we know from Silicon Valley, where I live, is successful companies are usually second. So the first one makes massive mistakes, and the other little company are watching, and they don't make the same mistakes. As we saw cannabis. I mean, there was one, I guess maybe it was Canopy, I'm not sure, but it was at one point valued at $7 billion. Okay, and 2 years later, it's sold whatever assets it has to some other little company. Something in the capitalist model worked for the entrepreneurs and the kind of quick buck people, but it didn't work very well. Lots of reasons, psychedelics now, at one point there was 400 companies worldwide saying that they were doing something with psychedelics. Okay. Most of them are gone. And from my point of view, 95% of them were working with high doses. And because very much so, the people running them didn't really have psychedelic experience. They had company experience, they had pharmacological experience, they had banking experience. One of the early companies was literally founded by someone whose prior career was hedge funds. Perfectly nice person. And the company, got sold to somebody recently. So when someone says, well, what's going to happen with the capitalist model and the answer is, it's going to be terrible for the first 2 rounds. And out of kind of Phoenix-like, out of the ashes of the destroyed and shouldn't have ever been there companies, we're going to have some wonderful things emerging. And I'm seeing people whose company went under, and they're doing it differently this time. They're doing it much more quietly. They're doing it much more slowly, and they're picking a target that makes sense. So I was asked to be on a board. I've been on a lot of advisory boards. I was a staff member of a couple of companies. And about 6 months ago, I simply pulled myself off of all of them, so I could recommend the ones I really found wonderful, without, you know, without compromising them or me. And that's worked very well. So I'm very supportive of a number of very exciting things happening. I'm an old friend of MAPS for many, many years. I have friends in the cannabis industry and so forth. And anything, the Dalai Lama said it nicely, is if you can't do anything else, be kinder. And so I'm looking for companies whose intention is to make the world a better place and make enough of a profit to stay in business. I'm less interested in companies that say, you know, if I get control of a molecule, I can charge like a regular pharmaceutical company and make a fortune and exclude people without money. That's a different model. It's not an evil model. It's I don't like it, but that is the model that we basically have legislated ourselves into. So I'm looking forward to, we're already in round 2 and I like it better. And I think round 3, we're going to be very, very happy.
You brought me to tears. Thank you so much, because, you know, it's a tough place working in this space and just trying to get it right, you know, like keep the integrity. I do believe, and you know, Rick Doblin said the same thing, that most everybody, maybe not everybody, but most everybody has, you know, a higher and good intention. We all want to see the changed planet. We all believe in these medicines. We've all had, well, maybe not everybody, as you just mentioned, but many of us have had our lives change so much
Right.
that to really be in the right integrity is important. And I actually said this years ago, that I do believe, like anything, things will shake itself out. And, you know, we've already seen some companies. I even bought stock in one of these companies that is now gone. Thankfully, not very much, but you know, and I do believe that there's a lot of good leaders out there setting example for, okay, how can we do this that's, you know, for the greater benefit of all and get into balance. You know, the fact is we live in a society that involves having money still. You know, most people need to pay bills, and it is part of our system, even if not everybody likes it. And you know, how can we just do better for the greater good and for the planet? So
And,
thank you so much.
and we can, if that's where we're starting from. And a lot of places are starting from that. Certainly, a lot of the people in the universities who are creating the data from which companies come and grab are deeply idealistic. Roland Griffiths, he set up, as much as he could, a way in which the research would always be, at least at his place, the non-commercial research, the spiritually oriented research, because he understood in his world, and it's a wonderful term, non-therapeutic uses are really far more important in the long run than therapeutic uses, which is, can I become a better enough being so that my being on the planet is worth the amount of CO2 that I'm putting out? It's an interesting question. You know, Kenneth Roshi many years ago was talking. There was an early female Roshi, Zen Roshi, who was British, and she was very ill at some point in Japan, and she was put on an all meat diet. She's been a total vegetarian since, you know, like age 8. And she said the moral question for her, and it was a real question, is, am I more valuable than a cow? Now, you shouldn't ask yourself that question, because very often you're going to be very depressed by the answer. But she decided that in terms of the work she was doing, that it was okay. And that's the kind of person that we're looking for. Is, you know, there's no, and if one is a venture capitalist, that doesn't mean that one is against anybody. the question of how do you manage, how does MAPS, which now has will have a license to do MDMA therapy for a number of years, as if it had a patent on a drug, how does it use that time, and how does it develop for all of us, and how does it attract the necessary capital it needs, not promising a giant return on investment. So there's a lot of economic models out there that are perfectly adequate. And it may be that this is something governments should be doing because they have more reach, and although they have more overhead, they don't worry much about profit margin. So it may become like a utility, like like you deserve. As there's a number of constitutions around the world that says you have an innate right to be healthy. And something that gets in the way of your being healthy is illegal. So that means when you say the microdoses seem to help people, they're illegal, can you do something about it? They say, I'll take that seriously. And so, I mean, what we're seeing now, and you're telling me that, microdoses are everywhere and it's as if they're legal. Well, if you ask the Drug Enforcement Administration, they say, oh, no. And you say, well, are you doing anything to stop psychedelics? And they say, really, no. And I said, and this is real, why are you not more interested in psychedelics? And this wonderful agent looks at me and says, there's no money in it. And I thought, wait. This is not a capitalist organization. I thought, yes, it is. Is each agency, in Austin and in San Francisco and in Louisiana has a budget. And here's two cars coming down the road. This one has, an old scientist who's carrying with him, 10 doses of microdosing, which is like half a gram. Okay. And here's these people with $47,000 in hundreds, two repeating rifles, a little bag of cocaine, and 10 kilos of pot. Who are you going to stop? Right? Because you get as your credit to your agency, the money and the seizures, and you also get to keep their car. And if you stop me, two things. I can afford a lawyer. And I'm not one of the minorities that gets historically screwed over. So in a funny sense, I'm watching, it's, I have yet to, so I've only seen one arrest for simply a psychedelic. So we're seeing a kind of common sense again, if you think about it, that we don't cause any problems. Nobody says, I'm so high on cubensis mushrooms that I can rob this bank and nobody can stop me. Nobody, not the way it works.
Such a good point. That's hilarious too, that imagery. So James, I have one more question. You're working on another book. Congratulations. This is amazing. And it's going to be about microdosing. And I'm curious, for maybe people like me who have just been microdosing for a long time now, it almost seems like, oh, what more is there to learn? What do we need to know? And are they even doing research on this? I'm curious, are we still discovering, and do you think we're going to continue discovering new benefits, new neural pathways, maybe different levels of consciousness? I'm curious, what does the future hold for microdosing?
Okay, now we're going to go down to microdosing. So we're not going to find any new states of consciousness. Okay, we're not in that realm. But what we're finding is that microdosing is a general kind of like a tonic, which means it seems to rebalance parts of the system that are out of balance. So that people who are depressed, now, when you take an antidepressant and say you're in the 30 to 40% of people that it actually helps. Okay, you're told by your physician that it'll take 4 to 6 weeks. And of course, people had theories about why that was true. Then there came along ketamine, where you feel better in an hour. So everybody said, well, I'll have a different theory. Microdosing doesn't alleviate depression. It in the way ketamine does, because with ketamine, it kind of takes your depression and does something to it, but your depression doesn't go away. Microdosing, for many people, the depression stops being part of your life, and then people stop microdosing. That's a different model. That's not symptom suppression, and it's not symptom, it's actually, and again, medicine doesn't use this word very often because they don't do it very often. It's called cure. That's different, and it's curing because the system now is capable of handling itself. In a sense, a vaccination is a cure. It gives the body the tools it needs, so however many times the virus passes through, it says, I'm sorry, we don't have any room for you. And we know that because the body is continually making new cells and viruses are making new variations, that a vaccine doesn't last forever. But it's in that realm. And so what I'm seeing is there are two groups of microdosers: people who microdose, clear up a major difficulty, microdose less, notice that they're feeling fine, and microdose, as you do, now and then when it feels appropriate. So, I have in my little medicine chest some things that I bought when I had some problem sometime. And every once in a while, I say, I wonder if I have any activated charcoal, because I'm feeling bloated. Now, I don't take activated charcoal. I'm not an activated charcoal user. I don't go to activated charcoal groups. My name is Jim, and I use activated charcoal. But it's available because it makes sense now and then, because my system is continually changing, and parts of it age, parts of it are damaged. And so if you kind of demystify microdosing, it makes more sense. It sounds more like what people are doing.
Incredible. Never thought of it that way, but I'm excited for this book. Can you tell us a little bit more about it, or is it kind of hush hush until it's ready to be published?
Imagine saying to an author, you want to talk about your book, or would you like not to? Okay. All the images I have about that are kind of about sexual rush, so I'm not going to go into it. But Jordan Gruber, we did our last book together on cells, on the kind of inner divisions. We're doing a book with a rough title of What You Need to Know About Microdosing. And we have St. Martin's as the publisher. They're a big publisher. We have an editor we're totally in love with. And what we're doing is we're answering hundreds of questions that people have. And a lot of those questions are, is it good for? Is it good for? Can it be used with? Can I use it to get off my medication, which I hate? Can I take it with my medication that I like? Those are all very real and important questions. And then there's large questions like, what does it do for sports? Okay. And there was a wonderful note, and you'll guess the topic, where someone said, if you guys ever let people know what this does for libido, you have a real product here.
Uh-oh.
Now, and it turns out when you get a little bit researchy, people have better sex. Okay. There are two possibilities. One is more sexual energy, mitochondria more excited and all that. The other is that you're able to be closer and more intimate and more open and less defended. And so that improves intimacy, which improves sex. Notice one is pretty much physical and the other is pretty much mental. It's not my job to tease those apart, but when people say, will this help my sex life? The answer is, it will allow you, to come from a better place one way or another. And so that's really what we're looking at.
Amazing. I hope there's a chapter on microdosing in adolescents and children. Is that something you might explore? Yes.
Well, rule of thumb is don't ever give anything to children because their brains are still developing. Now, the people who dose kids with learning difficulties with amphetamines, with speed every day, and there are hundreds of thousands in the United States, they haven't read that. Okay, but it's like when you're pregnant, you say, well, can I take? And the answer is, don't even finish your sentence. The answer is no. Okay, so we have a lot of adolescents because we say we can't give you any advice. What we're looking at, for example, is a person with what's called severe childhood autism. Okay, and this is the child I'm thinking of the first time their parent my advice was, I can't give you any advice. And he said, I hear you. And then he wrote me back a few days later as I figured out the right dose, someone sophisticated. And what he said about his child, who was 5, he said he's using many more words. He's more cheerful, and he isn't hitting his head as often. Okay. Now, fortunately, I have now a note from him. Child is now 8. Microdosing maybe once a month. And what he says, it resets him emotionally, and he's always happier. And he no longer hits his head. And he's now more interested in things like the natural world. There's a creek on the property. I mean, he's still what we would call seriously autistic, but he's much better. So that's what we're learning with children. And we can't learn much because one is, I'm not a researcher and have, hospitals and universities. And 2 is, it's generally felt not a good thing to do. It's not safe for children until there's enough of a reason. And so if, for instance, that child is really a good exemplar of what could happen for kids with more severe autism, we're going to find citizen science rushing in. And eventually, if enough people are saying to their pediatrician, Johnny is better, the pediatrician will talk to it as a local meeting, and somebody will say, the University of such and such has a pediatric research department, and now that it's legal and we don't have to spend 3 years getting permission, we'll do the research. So right now in Holland, where it is basically legal, they're doing a lot of very straightforward research. And let's take another one that we see in children, ADHD. Okay, and the study was very, very simple, very straightforward. 200 people, all with ADHD. Half on ADHD medication, half not. Okay, everybody microdoses, I think, Fadiman Protocol or every other day for a month. And you see each week, improvements in both groups. What was fun about this is why research is fun, is the group on medication improved much more slowly. By the end of the month, they were pretty much at the same place. So that's interesting. That says something that we don't understand about the medication. Okay, it may have been just that it suppressed the effect of the microdose, may be much more complicated. So we are looking at children, or at least younger people, when we can. But it's a very tricky thing to do, because you really don't want. We know so many medications are so harmful to children in ways that are different than adults. You don't do that.
Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to leave you an opportunity to share with the audience anything that you want to share that you have coming up in the next 6 to 12 months, or anything you want to promote. We do have your website right here below this interview, but yeah, if there's anything you want people to know about.
Well, my website at the moment has a great big pile of podcasts, often with kind of topics, and people are, obviously they're there for that reason. I'm devoting most of the next 6 months to finishing the book. And the reason for the book is to answer as many questions as possible, partly because that's the correct ethical thing to do, and partly realistically, answering my mail gets to be, it's hard because people often with real suffering and real problems and real issues are asking for help. The mail I love is people that say, and I'll say it here too, if you are microdosing and something which you think is interesting has happened to you, please write me, because that's how other people get to know. Okay, and I'll give you one from last week. Now, I never heard of this till last week. This is something called a throat polyp. Okay, It's something that people in the speaking world, politicians, trial attorneys, pop stars, people who stress their voices get, okay? And if you read the regular literature, which I've just read in the last few days, NIMH says microsurgery is often very effective, okay? Microsurgery has a word in it that a lot of us don't like called surgery. I like it, it's micro. I get a report from someone who says I had throat polyps and I microdosed for 3 months and they went away. And my voice therapist said in their 40 years of practice, never seen that happen before. So that's what I mean, how you can help, which is, now we're just exploring that. And it turns out sometimes polyps go away, but not very often. So that's what we're looking at. That's the kinds of things that we're still discovering. So your question of why should we have this book is because we are in still the discovery phase. Because psychedelics tend to, if you look at the research, it's almost 95% mental conditions. That's as if the mind and body are somehow separate. Okay? So the other report that I'm kind of fascinated by recently is a woman who said, I've been anorexic for some years, and I've been microdosing for 3 months, and I've gained 30 pounds. Okay? Now, that's worth exploring, because if you go to the anorexia literature, there's nothing really they know how to do for anorexia. Okay? And we know the age group, predominantly women, predominantly kind of teenage and late teenage, and it can kill you. So that's why the book is there, so that someone who has nothing else, can't turn to anything, is somewhere in Senegal and is anorexic, and there's another war, so all the physicians have fled. There's something they can do, which is there might be some mushrooms in the backyard. And I'm thinking, when I say mushrooms in the backyard, in a culture which accepts mushrooms, psychedelics, I'm thinking now the small villages in Mexico when we first were introduced by Maria Sabina to mushrooms and rituals and going to God. In that village, people have mushrooms in their gardens, and a young man is going to have to climb a great big hill carrying a heavy load. He takes the mushroom and he chews it, and he knows that'll give him energy enough to go up that hill at a reasonable rate. It's just the same way that I say, gee, I'm getting kind of tired and I really want to do more this afternoon. I'll have a cup of coffee. Okay. Now there's also in the same town, in the same village, in the same culture, profound rituals developed over hundreds of years using the same mushroom. So we're not secularizing it. We're not stealing it from indigenous people. We're using it in a kind of common sense way as indigenous groups around the world have for thousands of years. So, people started to say, you're the discoverer of microdosing. And I used to go for that because I thought it might even be true. I'm the person that kind of re-noticed modern microdosing, because when I got into this, I had no idea that anyone had ever done it before. And I was at one point going around saying, I'm kind of special because I kind of found this. And an anthropologist friend of mine said, did it ever occur to you, Jim, that indigenous people who use these as psychedelics and rituals might have tried smaller doses? And then he ended up by saying, by the way, whenever I'm starting to get a cold, I just take a little bit of psilocybin, and I haven't had a cold in 15 years. Okay. So it's, I get to rediscover what has been known forever by almost every culture except ours. And it's wonderful. And I get to talk with you and share that because since I don't have a company and I'm going to have a product, so I'll be telling you, if you don't buy my book, life will not be good for you, but I don't have to do that yet. So we can just appreciate your use of it, which is when it makes sense. My understanding of it, which is it makes sense for an enormous number of conditions because it helps the whole body. don't think of it as a pharmaceutical. Think of it as a vitamin.
Hmm.
Nobody says, well, what illness is vitamin D good for? You say, no. A vitamin is something that's good for the body and the mind. They happen to be in the same box. So it's a better model for your head. High doses are special. And they're a special event and they have special properties. Microdosing have no special properties, except as that book says, you can have a really good day.
James, this is such an honor to have you here. This has been such a fun conversation. I love how, you bring so much wisdom with an air of lightness and excitement and fun. And I want to just honor you and thank you for all the work you've done for humanity, for this movement, for our future, for the psychedelic space, and for people to have a better day and just feel better and be kinder.
Exactly. I mean, that's all we can do. And the nice thing is everyone can do that. Everyone can be a little kinder. And if a microdose helps, terrific. So thank you for inviting me and thank you for being such a wonderful, see, I'm going to date myself now, a wonderful hostess. Okay, I said it.
Thank you.
Thank you.